Hello. Have you ever heard of a sea that vanishes right before your eyes? Or of mysterious hieroglyphs hidden on its dry seabed? And what about a secret city tucked away on an island? Today, I'll tell you about the most intriguing mysteries and secrets of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea is a disappearing salt lake in Central Asia, located between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Its disappearance is one of the greatest man-made environmental disasters in human history. About 50 years ago, this lake was the fourth largest in the world. By 1960, the Aral Sea covered an area of 68.9 thousand square kilometers and held 1,083 cubic kilometers of water. It stretched 426 kilometers in length, 284 kilometers in width, and reached a maximum depth of 68 meters. But today, it has almost completely dried up, gradually turning into the world's youngest desert, the Aralkum. Tourists come here to see a unique ship graveyard, abandoned vessels stranded in the middle of the desert, standing as monuments to the sea's former grandeur. The Aral Sea was formed by meltwater from glaciers on the slopes of the Pamir and Tian Shan mountain ranges. Over time, the rivers that fed the lake would shrink and swell again, changing both its water level and salinity. Around 13,000 years ago, as the inflow of water diminished, the lake's salinity rose sharply. Ancient historians also mentioned it under various names. In the 5th century BCE, Herodotus called it the Saka Gulf, believing it to be connected to the Caspian Sea. The Arab geographer Al-Istakri described it as Khwarezm. The modern name Aral, which means island, became established when the lake began to shrink and numerous small islands appeared on its surface. The surface area of the sea has since shrunk to about 8,000 square kilometers, while its water volume has dropped to just 75 cubic kilometers. Since the Aral has no connection to the world's oceans, it is technically not a sea, although its waters possess a unique chemical composition. They are rich in sulfates and carbonates, the ions that give sea salt its distinctive properties. This makes the Aral's water something of a hybrid, combining the qualities of both seawater and freshwater. Let's return to the sea's remarkable features. According to the basic laws of physics and the influence of Earth's rotation, bodies of water in the northern hemisphere tend to have currents that deflect to the right. But the Aral defies these rules. Its current mysteriously flows to the left, moving clockwise. Another enigma lies in its oxygen dynamics. Unlike most lakes, where oxygen levels decrease with depth, in the Aral, they actually increase. In July, maximum temperatures in the region can reach as high as plus 50 degrees Celsius, similar to the neighboring Karakum and Kizilkum deserts. The climate here is merciless, and as the locals say, only the hardiest souls can survive in such conditions. But why has life around the Aral become so harsh? And why did the sea vanish so quickly? The roots of this tragedy lie in massive irrigation projects. In the late 1960s, the Soviet Union launched an ambitious program to expand irrigated agriculture in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Special priority was given to cultivating cotton, the so-called white gold, a crop notoriously thirsty for water. To irrigate the fields, canals were diverted from the two main rivers that fed the sea, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya. Before long, the demand for water grew so immense that the Aral began to shrink at an alarming rate. Being relatively shallow to begin with, the lake simply couldn't withstand the thirst of the cotton fields. Moreover, the primitive canal system lost huge amounts of water to the desert sands through leakage and evaporation. By the late 1980s, the water level had dropped so drastically that the once unified sea split into two separate bodies, the northern small Aral and the southern large Aral. Over time, the drying of the Aral has left behind a haunting landscape. Dozens of forgotten fishing boats and cargo trawlers lie scattered among the sand and salt flats, rusting away like post-apocalyptic monuments. The sea has long since retreated. The town is dying, and only the black silhouettes of ships stand out against the blinding white desert. It may look like a surreal movie set, but this is the grim reality of the modern Aral. Today, the shoreline lies some 150 kilometers away from Muyanak, once a thriving port city. Yet this is only the tip of the iceberg. The disappearance of such a vast body of water has changed the climate, damaged people's health, deepened social problems, and dealt a devastating blow to the environment. Once, the seas softened the harshness of winter and brought coolness in summer. Now, summers here are scorching and dry, while winters are cold and severe. The change has affected not only nature, but also the people whose lives were intertwined with the sea. When the Aral's fishing industry finally collapsed in the 1980s, some 60,000 people lost their jobs and were forced to abandon their homes. Climate change and growing ecological threats drove away even those who were not directly dependent on fishing. In the 1960s, more than 40 species of fish inhabited the Aral. By the late 1970s, only 6 remained. In a desperate attempt to revive the fishing industry, Black Sea flounder were introduced in the 1970s, but by 2003, the concentration of salt and chemicals had become so high that even the flounder disappeared. Today, only carp and perch species survive in what's left of the Aral's waters. To sustain biodiversity, some invertebrates, such as shrimp species, capable of surviving in brackish water, have also been introduced. Over the past 40 years, the desiccation of the Aral has given rise to a new, menacing desert, the Aralkum. Where the sea once stretched, now lies a vast toxic wasteland filled with salty dust storms that carry poisonous substances for hundreds of kilometers. The Amudarya and Sirdarya rivers, which once flowed into the Aral, brought with them tons of pesticides and toxins that settled on the seabed. Each year, sandstorms lift more than 100 million tons of dust and toxic salts from the dried-up bottom into the air.
Just imagine, once vegetables were grown here, but today nothing grows on these lands, and livestock, except for a few camels, can only be found hundreds of kilometers from the former shoreline. This environmental disaster has taken a serious toll on the health of the local population. Since the 1980s, cases of leukemia, typhoid, chronic bronchitis, asthma, and other diseases have become increasingly common among residents. Traveling to the Aral region now requires careful preparation. Its harsh climate and hazardous environmental conditions can pose risks even to organized tour groups. Head coverings, clothing that protects against wind and dust, and ample water supplies are absolute essentials. Hiking across the Aralkum is considered extremely dangerous, and the best time to visit is early autumn, when the weather is relatively mild. The Aralkum Desert is the youngest desert on Earth, and its area already covers about 38,000 square kilometers. Some daring travelers who have ventured into the Aralkum describe being caught in dust storms and seeing a salty mist that settles on plants as a white, chemical-like crust. Sadly, these harsh conditions inflict irreparable harm on the health of local inhabitants, forcing many to abandon these desolate lands. Now let's head to another remarkable spot in the Aral region, located in the Kieselorda region near the village of Aukespe. Here, in the middle of the steppe, a thermal spring was discovered in 1986 during a hydrogeological expedition. The borehole pierced the former seabed of the Aral Sea and, at a depth of about 1,200 meters, reached an underground reservoir of hot mineral water with a temperature of around 62 degrees Celsius.
For more than 30 years, a powerful salty fountain has been shooting upward more than 2 meters high, forming a small stream where locals have found an unusual place to bathe. According to local legend, the spring possesses healing powers, and people now travel here from all corners of Kazakhstan. The mineral water is rich in beneficial elements that are said to have positive effects on the joints, skin, and nervous system. However, it's important to remember that bathing in the hot spring should be done in moderation, no more than twice a day and for no longer than 30 minutes each time. This spring has become a true local attraction, one that every traveler to the Aral region should see. But what secrets still lie hidden in the waters of the Aral? One of the sea's great mysteries is the strange markings discovered on its drying seabed. These unusual lines, known as the Aral geoglyphs, were first noticed by a Kazakh hydrologist in 1990. Some researchers have speculated that the figures might even be messages left behind by a highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Aerial photographs show that they cover an area of about 500 square kilometers, though they appear to extend beyond the limits of the images. Before the water level began to fall, the figures lay at depths of 10 to 15 meters. The lines of these shapes vary in length from 100 meters to as much as 6 kilometers, while their width, remarkably consistent within each figure, ranges from 2 to 100 meters. Although the origin of these mysterious grooves and lines remains a subject of debate, scientists have suggested that they may have formed naturally, carved by blocks of ice moving slowly across the muddy seabed. Let's leave the mysterious lines to the experts and head instead to a secret site from the Cold War era. Welcome to the enigmatic Vozrozhdeniya Island, once home to the classified Soviet town of Aralsk 7. This closed settlement was part of a top-secret USSR testing ground for biological weapons. Today, the island feels almost bewitched. There are hardly any plants, animals, or people left, and the air around it is still thick with dark legends. Soviet scientists arrived on Vozrozhdeniya Island in 1972 to launch a highly classified biological research project. The location was completely isolated and soon transformed into a grim, restricted zone. Here, researchers worked on developing lethal pathogens, including plague, smallpox, typhoid fever, and brucellosis. The island was divided into two parts. One contained a vast complex of laboratories, while the other, known as Kantubek, functioned as a small city for scientists and their families. It was here that anthrax spores were produced on an industrial scale. In 1988, a leak of a dangerous virus occurred, resulting in human casualties. The contaminated spores were disinfected by mixing them with bleach and then buried in pits, still visible today on satellite images. Anthrax proved to be incredibly resilient. Its spores can withstand both extreme heat and cold, resist antibiotics, and are tens of times smaller than a human hair. Even today, these spores may still linger in the soil, leaving the island potentially contaminated. Since the early 1990s, all inhabitants have left Vozrozhdeniya Island, and it has remained deserted ever since. Today, it is no longer an island at all, but part of the salty Aralkum desert, though it still bears the weight of its troubled past. Cleanup operations have been carried out, but many continue to doubt the site's safety. The United States once offered financial assistance to complete the island's decontamination project. For about a week, the area was treated with disinfectants that destroyed part of the spores, yet the air around it is still considered contaminated. Only a few people, mostly journalists, dare to visit, donning full protective suits. Such is the story of Vozrozhdeniya Island, a place that once housed one of the most unsettling cities of the Soviet era. But what other marvels are hidden within this mysterious sea? The Aral region holds around 60 historical and architectural monuments. According to researchers, the sea's waters have receded and returned many times throughout ancient history. On its dried-up seabed, scientists discovered what they call a lost Atlantis. In 2001, archaeological excavations began in Kazakhstan, during which researchers stumbled upon the remains of an ancient medieval settlement, now known as Aral-Asar. At first glance, archaeologists could hardly believe their eyes. Against the white backdrop of salt, the outlines of ancient structures emerged, including mausoleums and necropolises. The site covers roughly 6 hectares, and ceramic artifacts found there have been dated to the 14th century. Judging by the agricultural tools discovered at the site, its inhabitants practiced farming, particularly rice cultivation, and ground the grain into flour. This remarkable discovery challenged the long-held assumption that 14th century Central Asia was inhabited solely by nomads and herders. The warehouses surrounding the settlement, as well as the remains of irrigation systems, indicate that the locals may have exported flour along the Great Silk Road. The city was solidly built, suggesting that its residents intended to remain there permanently. At the edge of the settlement lay the necropolis known as Kerderi, which also marked the boundary of Aral-Asar. Once, its walls were laid with fired bricks, and its foundation was a sturdy structure made of massive stone slabs. However, Aral-Asar was suddenly submerged when the waters of the Aral Sea rose again, sweeping away this once thriving civilization. Archaeological research at the site continues to this day, sparking great interest among scientists and historians alike. On the seabed, remnants of ancient settlements and sacred structures continue to surface. Architectural monuments reveal themselves gradually as the Aral recedes, and archaeologists believe that many more discoveries still lie ahead. That's all for today, friends. If you've learned something new, give this a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and see you again soon.